Ooh.
Okay. Okay, I want to welcome everyone and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are super excited Healthy Planet has partnered with Host Defense to present this webinar and upgrade your immune system with mushrooms. Before I introduce you to your presenter, the presentation should run approximately about 50 minutes with a Q&A session at the end. Should you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box at the bottom of your webinar window, and then we'll do our very best to answer all of your questions at the end of the evening. Allow me to introduce your educator for this evening. Jerry Angelini is the head of education at Host Defense Mushrooms. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us this evening, and over to you.
Thank you so much. It's really awesome to be here. Thanks for everyone that's coming on board. I still see people coming on board, and I have a couple of just basic housekeeping stuff. So as people come on, that's totally cool too. We have a Q&A area. You'll see a little control panel on there. Make sure you put all your questions into that Q&A area, and I will definitely go back near the end and start, responding to those. I've got quite a bit of material, and if you start asking me questions, we are going to go off on a tangent, and that could last hours, and we definitely don't want to keep you all night long. So we got to keep me focused and going in the right direction here. So yeah, all right. Okay, yeah, just so before we start, I do like to gently remind people that the lecture tonight is really for educational purposes, and we've got a ton of information to go over, and it goes over a lot of the scientific reasoning, the research, the rationales for formulas and things like that. And there's a lot of really excellent evidence here. And we do want to just remind you that nothing's a panacea, right? So if you do have a health concern that you're working with, we definitely suggest that you work with an integrative healthcare practitioner around that. I think just there is one more thing about this I was going to say. I think that's good for now. Also, again, I do see that there's a lot of chat and Q&As going on there. Just keep on putting them in there, and Priscilla and I will go back and we'll kind of make sure we cover everything at the end of the session. All right, just a little bit more about me. If you just came on, I know Priscilla and I were chatting about some of my experiences in the world, and I have to say I've been really lucky. I've had some amazing people that I've trained with over the years. I do have my undergraduate and graduate degrees from Boston University, and these are in rehabilitation counseling and rehabilitation for chronically injured or ill individuals, psychiatric substance abuse, TBI, and just chronic disease in general. I have gone on and I've gotten a lot of different certifications and postgraduate certificates and everything from traditional Chinese herbalism to Ayurveda and clinical Western herbalism, traditional Thai techniques, clinical aromatherapy, you name it. I do a whole lot of stuff. I still have a private practice. It's not that extensive at this point because I'm really focused here at Host Defense, but I've been an integrated practitioner for over 30 years and have used mushrooms with a lot of people in my practice. All right, we're going to cover some fun stuff. First off, we'll talk about some historical and scientific fun facts. And then we're going to jump into a review of the immune system, since that's what we're here for. We'll talk about some key mushrooms that are going to be really helpful for just immune support. And then I'll cover some just basic information about what to kind of look for in mushroom companies and specifically in Host Defense and what makes Host Defense some pretty cool mushrooms. All right. So some fun facts. Mushrooms have been used cross-culturally on just about every continent of the planet except Antarctica. Like mushrooms don't really thrive in ice. So, they definitely didn't thrive down there, but just about everywhere else. They have been the focus of things like cave paintings. And this is a cave painting from the Tassili Caves in northern Algeria. And you can see it's kind of a shamanic looking figure with a bee mask covered in mushrooms. And it's kind of wild. It's over 6,000 years old. So we definitely know that we have this long and very interesting relationship with mushrooms. They have been used as fire starters, punk for early rifles, clothing. And as you see here, this hat, this is a hat that if you know who Paul Stamets is, you'll know that he wears this mushroom hat all the time. It's made from the Amadou mushroom. And there's literally a couple of elderly women who in Transylvania, I kid you not, they have this family recipe of how to work with the mushroom to delaminate it, create felt from it, and then turn it into like gloves or hats or vests or purses or things like that. And it's super warm material, so it's really insulating. And I put a hat on my head, and in 2 minutes I'm sweating. It's that effective as an insulator. But then we've also used mushrooms as food, but also as as substances to benefit our overall health and wellness. And this picture up at the top here is a picture of reishi mushroom, which is one of the ancient. It's been used for over 2,000 years in traditional Chinese medicine. So just a beautiful history of support cross-culturally. There's some cool similarities that in the animal kingdom and the fungal kingdom or mushrooms share together. Um, there are some things that fungals share with plants. So they're kind of like this intermediary kingdom in the world, right? Mushrooms and plants do share a root or root-like structure. But plants' root structure is really passive. So they just kind of absorb stuff. Plant roots don't really do much else. But the mushroom root system, we call these mycelia, and these are very active. In fact, they do everything that our bodies do. They just do it out in the world. So they don't have like skin within which they work. They just secrete all of those life functions right into the world around them. And so like some of those things are, they'll secrete their digestive enzymes into their growth substrate, and they digest that, and then they absorb those nutrients. We do that in our stomach and our intestinal tract. Mushrooms have an immune response, and it protects them from, predators and competitive species. And we have an immune response. We just keep ours in our body, right? Mushrooms also have a sensory system, and this is what we call quorum sensing compounds. And it helps them adapt to their world around them, just like our sense of touch or smell or taste or vision. It helps us see what's around us and adapt to that as well. I think another little tidbit that's kind of cool is that humans and fungi and mushrooms and humans, we share about 55% of the same DNA, which is kind of cool. Plants and humans only share about 15% of the same DNA. So we're definitely much closer to fungi than to plants. One of the cool things about working with the fungal kingdom is that we know how to capture and conserve many of those compounds that mushroom use to, live and eat and digest and assimilate nutrients and fend off competitors and pathogenic species. And we can conserve those and use those for our own health and wellness. And I think that's particularly important as we're learning how to navigate our world around us. All right. Another really cool thing about mushrooms is that they're not these, unidimensional substances. So when we think about like vitamin C is vitamin C. There's not much else. It's vitamin C, right? It's like pretty simple and straightforward. Mushrooms are not simple and straightforward. They're really complex. And what we've found with mushrooms is that just about every mushroom we've ever studied supports at least two, if more, systems of your body. So they're all going to support your immune response plus something else. And this can be really wonderful, especially if you're, thinking about if you're thinking about how to kind of uh, keep the number of supplements that you use down to a minimum, whether it's just because you don't want to take a bunch of capsules, or maybe you have some financial constraints and you want to really pick the best supplement that's going to help the broadest range of concerns that you might have. Another thing that's really great about mushrooms is that the research is ongoing, but it never stops. As a matter of fact, there's so much research about mushrooms supporting health issues. It's a little overwhelming. And there's two great places that you can read up about mushroom research. One's called pubmed.gov, and the other is scholar.google.com. I use these because they provide us with peer-reviewed research articles, and they're not blogs. And, blogs can be entertaining, they can be fun to read and interesting, but most of the time, blogs are either not referenced at all, or they're referenced inaccurately. And that can provide us with misinformation. And we have to be super careful about that in today's world, right? So we want to make sure that whenever we look at research, or, whenever we listen to someone talk about mushrooms or anything really, we want to make sure that it's well grounded and it's not just a storytelling. Stories are great, but I want to make sure that there's not just a traditional historical use, but that there's also some really great evidence of it in research. So, if someone really just focuses on just the traditional use, that information may be a little outdated, and we want to make sure that we're using some of the most current information that we can have access to. Okay, let's hop into the immune system. This is a really beautiful system of our body. It's really complex, and I'm going to try and kind of bring it down to some of the basic aspects that I think are going to be really important. So the immune health, in general, immune health is not just about making immune systems strong. It's making sure that they stay within what we like to call the Goldilocks zone, because immune overreactivity is just as problematic as immune underreactivity. Hyperreactive immune responses can manifest as things like allergies, but also things like autoimmune disorders, where our immune system attacks our own tissue. So really supporting a balanced immune response is a really key approach for your day-to-day health, but also for longevity and well-being. And one of the ways I like to explain this is you don't necessarily walk into your house and turn on every single electrical appliance at once, right? I mean, it's just not necessary, right? But you also don't want to walk into, walls in your furniture because you're sitting in a dark house and you don't turn on any lights, right? So either direction is not helpful. We want to find that really good, balanced middle road there. So we want to switch our approach to the immune response, and for supplements that support the immune response, to look for appropriate modulation or balancing of the immune response. And another example here is even if you're fighting infections, if you overstimulate the immune response, it can send cytokines, which are messenger molecules for the immune response. They can cascade throughout our bodies, and they can actually make things worse. And many cytokines are inflammatory in nature, and they in fact make us feel worse, even though they're helping the immune system work harder. So keeping that balance, like keeping all of the checks and balances of the immune system engaged simultaneously, is a really important approach to health and wellness. All right. You got two main branches of your immune response. One's called the innate and the other is called the acquired. The innate immune cells, these are ready to go from the moment you're born. Actually, they're constantly monitoring our internal environment. Think of them as having this instinctive or innate knowledge of what to do right from the beginning. The acquired immune system, and we also call this the adaptive immune response, needs more instruction, and it can take up from anywhere from 7 to 14 days for the adaptive or the acquired immune response to really get engaged in any kind of situation. So they basically have to like figure things out, and they're more specific in their activity and in their functions. Some important cells are things like macrophages. These innate immune cells, they seek out and they destroy pathogens. Natural killer cells and natural killer T cells, they do exactly what they sound like they do. They go out and they destroy and blow up and kill, pathogens, but also cells that are not recognized as us. So they'll look for mutations and foreign proteins. B cells they participate in the process of foreign cell identification and protein identification. So they help make things called antibodies. And we've been hearing a lot about antibodies lately, right? But B cells also house memory cells. And this is really important because they can live for decades in our immune response, and they can like respond more rapidly when they've already been exposed to something. All right. Granulocytes. These are really highly inflammatory cells, and they come into play in when we are exposed to parasites, especially in the intestinal tract. And these granulocytes, they secrete really highly reactive substances like histamines and cyclooxygenases. And we know what happens when histamine gets released, right? You get red and itchy and irritated and whatnot. And, although like most people in Canada and in the United States don't really worry too much about parasites, we do have to realize that parasites have had a significant negative impact on human health and wellness and longevity, for millennia, actually, right? And in some places in the world, parasites are still, a problematic experience. So, although we may not think about parasites too often, it is part of this hardwired process of our immune response. So luckily, when we take a look at mushrooms, we see this modulatory activity. They engage important innate and adaptive or acquired immune cells. But mushrooms in general do not engage granulocytes, which are associated with allergic and parasitic immune responses. So this is super cool. Like, the only time that's not the case is if you're actually allergic to a mushroom, and then you're going to mount like those mast cells and eosinophils and basophils will get mounted. But if you're not allergic to mushrooms, then those granulocytes don't get engaged at all. All right. So the immune system's purpose is to defend us against pathogens, right? But also cell mutations, and it supports the body's tissue healing functions once we've been injured. So by its very nature, it creates a process of inflammation when it's engaged. Immune cells do remain quiet until they're triggered. And if we stop and think about it, let's talk about some of the things that will trigger the immune response. So the detection of tissue damage, so like whether it's an injury, whether it's like a bump or a bruise or a cut or a strain or a sprain or maybe even surgery, right? That's going to trigger it. Pathogens are going to trigger it. And then interestingly enough, oxidative molecules. So we always talk about antioxidants and why they're important. Oxidative radical molecules, they'll trigger an immune response too. All right, so once those immune cells get engaged, they start to secrete inflammatory cytokines. And these cytokines are messenger molecules. And what they do is they call to other immune cells, they get them involved and engaged. They can also help destroy whether it's pathogens, or they might clear out damaged tissue. Cytokines also increase swelling, right? So that more fluid can get into the area that's impacted. So inflammation, and we know this, inflammation can be problematic, but it's absolutely essential for acute phase immune response. So if we're going to get our immune engaged, there's going to be some inflammation. So it's not always bad. It's only problematic if it gets out of control, like if there's too much inflammation, or if it's chronic. So it just keeps going on and going on, and the immune system doesn't turn off. And that can happen for a number of different reasons. But without that acute phase infection, we wouldn't even heal from cuts. So we got to have it for sure. There are checks and balances within the immune response, and this is really critical. Like I said, you've got to engage the immune response, you've got to keep it in that Goldilocks zone of functioning, and then it needs to resolve so that the tissue can kind of go back to a state of homeostasis or watchful waiting. So there are anti-inflammatory cytokines that are secreted and work with all of those immune cells to kind of keep them going in the right direction. They can be like, think of them as like Julie, the cruise director, for all of you who remember The Love Boat. And for those of you that are too young and don't remember it, think about them as like a really great babysitter that's got like a bunch of 8-year-olds in a room together, and a really great babysitter, or like preschool teacher, right? They're going to be able to kind of work with all of those kids and keep them all functioning well together in a small room, right? So this is what we call modulation. All right. In this table, this can get a little confusing, so I'm going to break it down for you step by step. This is some research that's been done on host defense mushrooms, and it shows you this modulatory activity that's like really powerful, and it's not typically seen in most substances. And so the way that host defense makes our mushrooms, it shows that not only does it engage important immune cells, like the ones I talked about, like macrophages and natural killer cells and natural killer T cells, B cells and T lymphocytes, the mushroom mycelium and the fermented rice also engage these inflammatory cytokines. And this is important. Again, remember, we want to make sure that the immune system can get into and respond to situations that are happening in the moment, right? So interleukin 1, interleukin 2, interleukin 6, interferon gamma, and tumor necrosis factors. Those are all immune signaling cytokines that get the immune system working. There's also a really strong upregulation of something called interleukin 1 receptor antagonist, and that does exactly what it sounds like. So it blocks the receptor site on our cells for interleukin 1. So although interleukin 1 is being expressed and it engages the immune response, we have a check. The receptor antagonist kind of limits the amount of interleukin 1 and limits just how much inflammatory response the body can create. So that's an important check and balance. And then interleukin 10 is kind of like the pacifier. So interleukin 10 goes in there and kind of tells all your immune cells to bring it down a notch or two, and then bring it down another notch or two, and then finally gets that immune system back to its state of watchful waiting so it's resolved. So this is one of the great things about host defense mushrooms in particular, and that it has both those engagement processes, but also the resolution and the checks and balances processes. All right. I'd like to talk a teeny bit more about the microbiome, right? More and more people are talking about the microbiome. It's really important, especially when it comes to immune health. Our immune systems have co-evolved along with a lot of different gut microflora, and it helps create defenses against pathogens and helps also develop tolerance in our intestinal tract for beneficial microbes in foods that we eat every day. So as a consequence, the immune system and the gut microbiota, they've developed a mutualistic relationship, and they regulate each other, interestingly enough, and they can be really cooperative, especially our probiotic microflora. The importance is that of this interaction is actually shown by the fact that about 70-ish% of the body's immune cells are found in the intestinal tract itself. So as we grow, this microflora shapes and develops our immune response and vice versa. And there's a communication that happens, especially between our probiotic microflora and our intestinal immune response. And so one of the things that is important to understand about this is many of the mushrooms that we look at today, or in general, they function as prebiotics for our probiotic microflora, especially those lactobacilli and those bifidobacteria that many people are familiar with. So our mushrooms feed our probiotic microflora. And in doing so, they can also help reduce the presence of pathogenic microflora in the intestinal tract. And so this has overall a really beneficial impact on our systemic immune response as well. All right. I'm going to talk about 3 mushrooms, and then we can talk about some formulas too. And the first one I want to talk about is reishi. This is the mushroom of immortality in traditional Chinese medicine. Super cool. Ganoderma lucidum is translated so that we call that a Latin binomial, and it translates into the bright, shined, or skinned, shiny mushroom. There's a lot of different species of Ganoderma, and a lot of them can be used interchangeably. Most reishi grows on hardwood trees in the temperate forests of the world, and that includes North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, like Scandinavia and Australia, and even New Zealand. So basically all around the world, we can find reishi species. And reishi has been used for centuries to support adaptation to stress. This is super important in our world today, right? So stress can manifest physically, it can manifest emotionally or mentally. We can also have stressors that are physical in nature, or we can have emotional stressors or mental stressors, right? So it's important to remember that as whole beings, like all of these impact each other, right? The physical impacts the mental, and the mental impacts the emotional, and the emotional wraps around and impacts the physical again. So it's all a cyclical in our beings, right? So there's no separation really. We can also see the beneficial impact that as if we're going to address stress, and this beneficial impact can occur in a similar process, right? So an important aspect of adapting to stress includes the reduction of our sympathetic nervous system. And this is sometimes we refer to this as our fight or flight mechanism, right? And the fight or flight mechanism upregulates when we perceive any kind of threat or stress. So reishi has been shown to reduce that fight or flight mechanism and allows us to feel more peaceful without being sedated. An important concept associated with stress is that it has a profound impact on immune functioning. So if we are stressed physically, emotionally, or mentally, it will have a negative impact on our immune response. A pretty cool research study looked at how reishi might support immune functioning in athletes that were training while they were living in a low oxygen environment. And that's a physical stressor. The athletes who were given reishi had a much more balanced and functional immune response as compared to the control group who did not have reishi in their diet. Another study that looked at exercise and fatigue, reishi has a positive impact on women with fibromyalgia, and we know that to be pretty problematic immunologically as well. And after 6 weeks of using a significant amount of reishi, these women experienced improvements in aerobic endurance, lower body flexibility, and enhanced physical performance. So reishi is an amazing adaptogen. It supports endurance, muscle function, increases our physical response to stressors, while simultaneously reducing neurological hyperarousal or the fight or flight mechanism, along with supporting immune response. Above and beyond that, reishi also supports cardiovascular health. It's an amazing antioxidant, especially for LDLs, and really helpful for heart muscle cells themselves. And reducing LDL oxidation reduces one of the primary triggers associated with cardiovascular plaque formation. Reishi also balances the immune response in our blood itself, but also in our vascular endothelium. That's the inside lining of the arteries of your vessels. And then reishi supports your heart muscles as well as your skeletal muscles in making more ATP, and that's the cellular gasoline, right? That's the energy currency of our cells. And so really what we're seeing here is that, oh yeah, reishi supports a balanced immune response, but wow, look what else it supports. It reduces the fight or flight mechanism. It supports cardiovascular health. It supports, it supports healthy glycemic responses and can be helpful for people to kind of maintain appropriate blood sugar levels that may, that may temporarily move in or out of being in the right range, right? And then overall, I do like to point out that reishi is really one of our strongest modulators of the immune response, especially to environmental triggers. So this might include like animal dander or pollen or dust mites. So reishi just has this really beautiful impact on a number of different systems of our body. And it's one of the reasons why it's been held in such high esteem in traditional Chinese medicine. It is our mushroom of immortality for sure. Pretty cool. All right, turkey tail. Turkey tail is Latin binomial is Trametes versicolor, and it translates into the multicolored one who is thin. Okay, pretty accurate, and it's a pretty beautiful mushroom too. It can be, more brownish than this, and really that color is dependent upon the mineral concentration in the soil or the trees that it's growing in. It also is native to hardwood trees in temperate forests around the world: North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, really. So very similar to reishi, in fact, which is also kind of cool. Host Defense has had a lot of our products tested by independent labs. And this one particular research study was carried out by a company called Natural Immune Systems Incorporated. And we actually published a peer-reviewed journal about Host Defense Trametes or turkey tail. The research published does validate the robust immune support activity that the host defense turkey tail provides. And remember, that's both the mycelium and the fermented rice, because we were able to test both of those separate. So even though in the product it's all one product, we were able to separate those, test the mycelium, test the fermented rice, and then use a control of just cooked organic brown rice that hadn't been fermented by the mycelium. And what we found is that the organic brown rice that was just cooked and not fermented has very little impact on the immune response. But once that rice has been fermented, it really changes it drastically. It turns it into a fermented food that has a profound impact regulating the immune response. So those mushroom mycelium engage the immune response. That fermented rice has a strong impact on, remember that interleukin 10 and interleukin 1 receptor antagonist that I talked about that help block and control and manage the immune response? A lot of that is due to that fermented rice. So having the both together is brilliant for balancing the immune response. Another research paper that I think is important to talk about is one that was published in 2012, and it was a human clinical trial, and it used host defenses, turkey tail mycelium, and fermented rice. It was conducted at the University of Minnesota and Bastyr University, and the cohort included women who had breast cancer, and they had undergone surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy. And, after the completion of these kinds of therapies, participants, people in general, their immune system is pretty damaged and destroyed. And it takes a good 6 to 12 months for your immune response to rebound. In this study, the women who had 6 grams of host defense turkey tail had an immune rebound of pre-conventional treatment level. So basically 2 weeks, their immune system was back up and running, which is amazing. It's unheard of, in fact. At 4 weeks, the women who received 6 grams of host defense turkey tail mushroom, their immune system was double that of what it was before they went into the chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation treatment. So not only did it get their immune system back in the game, it doubled it, which is really pretty impressive. Another thing that's great about turkey tail is it supports liver health and liver function, and it can be really protective against toxic substances that we might be exposed to either knowingly or unknowingly. Some of the research on turkey tail shows reduced damage from exposure to alcohol, which we know alcohol does kill some cells, like not just brain cells, it can damage our liver tissue too. And so turkey tail can be really protective for us if we're going to be imbibing. The other thing that there's some really nice research on turkey tail's effect as a prebiotic for a probiotic microflora. All right, another really cool mushroom that I love, and it's like the mascot for host defense, is Agaricon. It's rare, it's really hard to find, and mostly because it really only grows on old growth trees, specifically larch and Douglas fir, occasionally other old growth conifers. And you can actually find Agaricon mushroom fruit bodies that are over 100 years old. And that's just mind-boggling that they can actually be that old and stick around and hang out. The Latin name, Fomitopsis officinalis, does not do it justice, belonging to the genus of tinder-like mushrooms. I mean, like, that's kind of boring, right? Let's come up with something so much cooler for a really amazing mushroom. But I think we're stuck with that one for a little bit, so we just got to deal with it. All right. The research on Agaricon is limited, and most of it is what we call mechanism of action study. It's usually in vitro data. We do have some preliminary research here at Host Defense, and it really focuses on the immune modulatory aspect. And although we haven't published it, we do like to have people keep their eyes open because we are publishing articles literally every year now. Our research team is pretty impressive. Moreover, what we found about Agaricon is that it supports a targeted immune modulatory activity. So not only does it get the immune system engaged, it really drives the immune system specifically towards pathogen identification and elimination. It also increases our intracellular immune response, which may be particularly helpful for things like viruses, right? So it does support the what we call extracellular immune response. And this is where we would see like bacteria or parasites or things like that. The intracellular is a little bit more complex, right? And Agaricon supports both of those processes very strongly. Agaricon has also been shown to help the body express growth factors for tissue regenerative activity. And then it's a really strong modulatory mushroom. So it helps really bring that immune system back into a balance. And so this is why I really love Agaricon. And it's really my choice for a person that comes to me and says, I get sick a lot, but I also have a lot of allergies. And I call this the upside down immune response, right? Because it's not strong enough on the basic day-to-day stuff, but it overreacts to stuff that's supposed to be neutral. Like that's an upside down immune response. And Agaricon helps our immune system kind of get right, put back into the right direction so that it can identify pathogens, it can address those, but it keeps the immune response functioning within normal limits so it doesn't react inappropriately to things that are supposed to be neutral. So I really love that Agaricon mushroom. Okay, I'm going to go over some three of our immune formulas, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the host defense in more detail. All right, Stamets 7. And you'll notice all three of these things, they say immune support on them. So that's why I like to go over and kind of make it a little bit clearer for people. Stamets 7 is your maintenance support. This is what someone would take if they want to just make sure their immune system functions well, but also if you want to kind of hit just about every system of your body too. You have cordyceps in there and reishi, and there's lion's mane and maitake and chaga and mesima and agaricus blazei. These 7 mushrooms hit everything from cardiovascular health to energy and athletic performance, to blood glucose regulation already within the normal range. You've got lion's mane, that's a great cognitive functioning and mood and brain support. You've got, wow, the maitake and chaga. It's just really your whole body will benefit from this. And you can take a capsule at breakfast and a capsule at lunch. I pretty much suggest people don't take mushrooms too late in the day because it can keep you awake. They can create some energy for you, which is great during the day. Not so great if you're trying to get to sleep, right? You can also take 2 capsules in the morning and at lunch if you want a little bit of an extra boost. MycoShield is 5 mushrooms, agaricon, reishi, chaga, birch polypore, and turkey tail. This is your shield of defense. So this is for people that come in contact with lots of other people. Maybe you're feeling run down. So this is that, like, at the first sign of not feeling on top of things, this is what you reach for. 3 to 4 sprays 3 to 4 times a day. You can actually do 3 to 4 sprays every hour or so as you go through the day if you really want to kind of boost your immune system a little bit more. You got 2 great flavors: cinnamon if you like red hots, peppermint if you like that menthol burst in your, like, it's just kind of like, woohoo, I am awake now, right? So you've got cinnamon and peppermint. I particularly like putting a little MycoShield peppermint in with my hot chocolate. It gives me a little bit of a minty hot chocolate experience, and I'm supporting that immune response. And the reason I love this formula and the spray particularly is because it coats your oral mucosa, and that's your primary portal of entry for pathogens. So we want to make sure that oral mucosa is really prepared and strong. My community is a 17 mushroom mix, and I like to use my community when something makes it past everything else that I'm using, because that happens, right? I mean, we're human, we're perfectly imperfect. So, stuff gets through, and my community is what I use when I'm like, okay, like, my MycoShield didn't work and my mushrooms didn't work and I'm really feeling under the weather. Then I kick in with my community, and sometimes I'll take 2 capsules every hour for like 4 or 5 hours during the day, just to kind of really get it in my system. Or if I'm really feeling yucky, I'll use that liquid in my community. I'll do like a dropper or two every hour for like 4 or 5, 6 hours during the middle of the day. Again, that liquid is super rapid in its uptake. The capsules are more like that deep, it goes a little bit slower. The liquid's much more rapid, but they both are going to support a balanced immune response. So Stamit 7 for everyday health for your immune system and your whole body. Myco Shield if you're a high contact individual out and about and in contact with lots of people, or maybe you're just starting to feel something. My community, I usually keep on the back burner just in case something makes it through, because I always like to have something available just in case. All right. Host defense. Built on Paul Stamets' pretty cool visionary research on all the potential that mushrooms have, especially the mycelium. When Host Defense started our retail offerings about 12 years ago, there really wasn't a mushroom category, right? So over the last 10 years, we've really seen a boom in companies that are mushroom companies, or companies that have a mushroom product, or they might have a product that has some mushrooms in it with other stuff. Host Defense, though, we're pretty unique, and I'm going to go over some of the things that make us a little bit different. Paul is just a super cool dude. He's been a mycologist for 40 years. He's written 8 books. Mycelium Running, great read, especially if you're into things like ecosystem restoration, or how fungal species really help our ecosystem and our world survive. So definitely read about it. There's some super cool information in there. Paul's also received a number of different awards for his contributions to science and to the ecosystem, and some of the work that he's been doing with things like bees and other pollinators. So he's just engaged in a lot of different diverse projects with universities and nonprofit groups and organizations. So really, like, definitely check him out online. He's a super cool guy. He's doing a lot of good work out there. Host Defense maintains total chain of custody for our products. And this is a great way to make sure that no one's cutting any corners, right? We cultivate 100% of the mushrooms that we use in our products, and we do that in Shelton, Washington at our farm. And this is at the base of the Olympic Peninsula. What we will do, though, is we'll go out into the wild and we'll take a tissue sample from a mushroom. It's about the tip of this side of my pinky finger. That's it. Just a little bit, so that the rest of the mushroom can stay in the world where it's supposed to be, to do what it's supposed to do, to protect the genome and the ecosystem. We bring that small little tissue sample back into our labs and we grow it out. Why this is important is because over harvesting of wild mushrooms is a real problem, especially when we're talking about our slow growing mushrooms like Chaga and Agaricon, right? They can take decades to really mature. And all it takes is, 5 seconds, well, a couple of minutes actually, to tear those conchs out of the tree. But it's going to take decades for it to replace itself. And we're burning through them too fast. And the research is really clear that the sustainable cultivation of especially Chaga and Agaricon are very active in their capacity to support our health and wellness. So definitely, if you have the choice, I would strongly suggest that you use sustainably cultivated mushrooms only, right? We do need to be cognizant of the impact that we're having on the world around us. We also use independent labs with internationally recognized and valid testing methods for identity, purity, composition, and safety. And these include things like genetic testing to make sure the mushrooms are the ones that we think they are, testing for pesticides and industrial compounds, microbiological contaminants. We want to make sure that they're safe, right? All right. I do want to touch base just a little bit on making sure that the mushrooms are organic. Mushrooms are a reflection of whatever they're grown in. So if they're grown out in the wild, they could be exposed to drift or other environmental contaminants. And growing them sustainably is a really important way to make sure that they are clean. All right. We do use rice as our growing medium, and this is important. It's an excellent food source for humans and mushrooms. The mycelium secrete enzymes into the rice. They digest it. They make it very bioavailable. They even create novel compounds from those rice starches. So it goes in as rice. It comes out as fermented food. And like most fermented foods, all of those things that we started off with, like the starches or other substances, have been biotransformed, and they have been shown to be immunologically active. And this is really important. It's really the whole thing together that makes it such a powerful support for a balanced immune response. Now, you can choose capsules or liquids. Most of the time, people will say, well, which is better? My response is whatever you're going to take. So like, if you don't like alcohol or you don't like the flavor of mushrooms, don't do those liquids. You're not going to take them. Take the capsules. But if you're sick and tired of taking capsules, maybe those liquids would be better for you, right? Overall, they're gonna basically give you the same response over time. However, the liquids are super rapid in their absorption, 2 to 5 minutes. So like cordyceps is half cordyceps, half reishi. Talk about opening up your lungs and reducing reactivity to environmental triggers. That is a brilliant liquid. Great for energizing you too. So, if you're gonna go up to the top of a mountain and do some skiing, bring along your cordyceps with you to help with oxygenation, to help with energy, and we'll even give you a little bit of vim and vigor while you're up there too. The capsules are great just for digestive health, for immune functioning, as well as some of the other things like, so that lion's mane powder, capsule, super great for neurological functioning, mood, memory, cognitive functioning. So both are great. Figure out which is going to be best for you. We do have a lot of stuff going on with sustainability. I want to open us and have us some time for questions, because it looks like there might be quite a few in there. So I'm just going to say, if you want to learn more about our sustainability, hop onto hostdefense.com and you can look up our sustainability report. This is super important to us. It has been since we started 40 years ago in Fungi Perfecti. And all of our decisions are based around this. And some of the just highlights I want to point out is that we use 0 virgin plastics in our process. All of our bottles are 100% post-consumer recycled plastic. This is super important. Now, some people will say, well, I thought glass was better. Glass has a really high carbon footprint associated with it, especially if you're transporting it. The one place that we do use glass is with our liquid extracts, because the plastic and alcohol aren't the best friends. So all of our liquid extracts are in glass, but everything else that we make are in 100% post-consumer recyclables. And then we also support something called gold standard offsets. And you can take a look at this online if you go and type in gold standard offsets. This is a way that we can actually give back to the world, reduce carbon emissions globally, and help people rise out of places of poverty. So I want you to take a look at that. There's some seriously cool stuff going on in the sustainability world. And one of these, you'll see the domestic biogas digesters. This is cool stuff too. We support that in places like, I think it is, gosh, I just blanked. It's not Thailand. It's right next to Thailand. What's the country right next to Thailand? I'm sure you'll remember. I can't believe my brain just fried and turned off, but you get the idea here. We're really trying to help people globally while reducing our carbon footprint. Okay, we got a great benefits of mushroom chart. You can get this on hostdefense.com as well. Then just remember, like reishi, turkey tail, agaricon are great single mushrooms, but you can also take a look at stamate 7, mycoshield, or mycommunity. So great mushrooms to support the immune response and some other aspects of your body too. Wow, okay, I went a little bit longer than I thought I would. Thank you so much for being patient with me. I see lots of questions in the Q&A and the chat. I think what I'm gonna do is, Priscilla, can you help me like
Yeah.
weed through? You're
Yeah,
awesome.
so I went through the chat and I've listed out the questions, and then you can read the Q&A on your own and then you
Okay,
can answer. So let's go through the ones that I got through the chat.
okay.
Susan is asking, I know this stuff is about immune stuff, but would you be covering anything about perimenopausal symptoms or adrenal fatigue? Is that something that we could briefly talk about?
Yeah, in terms of perimenopausal symptoms, those really respond best to some herbs like, chasteberry and maybe things like shatavari. So, those really respond well. In terms of adrenal fatigue, cordyceps is amazing. So like it's half cordyceps, half reishi. It kind of helps the adrenal glands kind of get back into an appropriate place. So it can help reduce cortisol oversecretion, but it can help with just general energy as you're going through this process of readaptation and resetting of your adrenal system. Yeah.
Fantastic. Nancy asked, should the type or mix of mushrooms I'm taking rotate as to not become accustomed to them?
That's not such a big deal with formulas. If you're going to do like single mushrooms, like if you're going to do just reishi or just turkey tail or just lion's mane, you might consider it. Like there is some reports of people saying that their immune system gets adjusted to a single mushroom. We are not seeing that in the formulas. So if you're using like the stamate 7, there's really no concern about that. The other piece, though, is with like lion's mane. We do know that if you stop lion's mane after about a month, some of the reports are indicating that you get a drop off of that cognitive functioning again. So you may want to just keep taking like specific mushrooms like lion's mane if you want to support your cognitive functioning too.
All right, Hashimoto's most beneficial mushroom and or combination of.
So again, we're not really into diagnosing or treating situations, but with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, it is an autoimmune response. So you want to think about mushrooms that help balance and regulate the immune response. Reishi is one of our best at that. I would definitely consider doing some reishi. Start low and go slow is a great approach. So you start with one capsule for, 3 or 4 days. You see how you feel. Then you add another capsule. You use that for 3 or 4 days. Maybe you add a third or a fourth capsule so that you're doing 2 at the breakfast and 2 at lunch, and just see how you respond overall with that. But yeah, start low and go slow.
All right, is there a different dose for those with autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, there you go. Start low and go slow.
Okay, and then could you confirm if the turkey tail was the one that Paul Simons used for his mom? Because I think
It sure was, yeah. So actually what happened was he started his mom off on turkey tail and then switched her over to Micrommunity. But the first like bulk of that was definitely on turkey tail. And actually, I didn't think he switched her over. I think he added it. So she was on, I think, 4 grams of turkey tail and 4 grams of Micrommunity a day. So she was taking a lot of mushrooms for sure. And after I think it was like 3 or 4 months, he had her start taking the Micrommunity too.
Great. Can you take too much of any of these products? And can you?
Of course you can. You can take too much water, right? So really, most people do well with 1 to 2 grams a day. If you really need a little extra work, 3 to 4 grams a day. If you're going in for some serious immune overhaul, then you're looking at 6 grams a day. That tends to be like the upward amount. For right now, I think that's a really good upward limit is 6 grams.
Fantastic. So concerning turkey tail and chaga, Is the dose for cancer patients different than for someone that's not a cancer patient? And is there another mushroom other than chaga and turkey tail that you would include?
Yeah, so it gets a little bit more complex. There's a lot of different types of cancers. The way that I like to look at it from a mushroom perspective is you have your hormonally responsive versus non-hormonally responsive. Any of your hormonally responsive cancers, stick with turkey tail all on its own. It has no impact on estrogen or testosterone formation that we're aware of at this point in time. If you have a non-hormonally responsive cancer, then you can take a look at things like Stamets-7 and My Community. I think like the body just, it really does like those complex formulas. Now, the reason why it's a single mushroom, just turkey tail with those hormonally derived cancers is because cordyceps and reishi can impact hormone signaling in the body. And we've got that in basically just about every other, right? But what you can consider is taking turkey tail and maybe Agaricon together. I would definitely think about that. And, doing like 2 grams of each a day. So like 2 grams of turkey tail and 2 grams of Agaricon in the morning, and then 2 of each somewhere around noon. And again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get our immune system in the process, right?
Fantastic. Are high oxalates and chaga concerned to the kidneys?
All right. So oxalates and chaga are found in wild crafted chaga. And you'll remember that I'm pretty strong, person in terms of my perspective on only using sustainably cultivated chaga, right? The sustainably cultivated chaga at Host Defense has minimal, it's actually almost non-detect amounts of chaga in our product. And it has to do with most of the oxalates that you would find, like if you're boiling chaga conchs, you get a lot of oxalates from that. When you're taking 1 to 2 grams of Host Defense chaga, mycelium, and the fermented rice, you have a very different oxalate composition associated with it. So there's almost no concern associated with oxalates with the Host Defense products.
All right. Does lion's mane help with gut issues?
I think it does. I think lion's mane is a great prebiotic. It's also going to impact everything in the gut intestinal immune response. There's been some really great research on lion's mane with gut health. Another thing about lion's mane is that it's been shown to trigger the release of various growth hormones in the system that help tissue regeneration, especially in those gut epithelial cells. So I'm a big fan of it. And we all know how the gut-brain connection, everyone's talking about that. So it's not just that lion's mane supports things like nerve growth factors and brain-derived neurotropic factors to help our neurological system function better. I think it also helps remodel the gut microflora and support those gut epithelial cells. So I would say, yeah, you may want to do like 2 grams of lion's mane a day instead of just the 1, maybe up to 3, depending upon your circumstances. But yeah, I would bump it up just a little bit more if you're having some gut concerns.
Can I just ask a question about that? So if you're using lion's mane just for cognitive and do you still need a probiotic in that case? Would you still additional, like just basic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So prebiotics are not probiotics, right? So we do know that our probiotic microflora do like a reinvigoration, typically anywhere from 4 to 5 days, in fact. So we really should be having some form of probiotic reinvigoration. I actually think people benefit from it every day or 2, or sometimes 3 if you want to push it out. You can have this in a number of different forms. If you have some really great live fermented food that, and we know like some of those kombuchas and some of those
Yep.
Yeah, kimchi, like
Mhm.
even like live pickles, like not the vinegar ones, but the live ones, like that live
Mhm.
fermentation process. Those are brilliant probiotics. If you don't want to take a probiotic in a capsule form, make sure you get it in your food.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We're
Yeah.
going to jump over to the Q&A part
Oh
because
gosh,
there's
there's a whole bunch there.
seven,
Yeah.
there's a bunch there, and I want to be fair to everyone and how they all trickled in.
Yeah.
Would you want me to read them off, or would you?
If you're keeping an eye on it, yeah, sure. This is great.
Okay, so the question 1 and 2 both have the same kind of question. Could you please recite the 2 research websites that you spoke about at the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. One is PubMed, P as in Paul, UB, M as in Mary, ED.org, pubmed.org. And then the other is scholar.google.com. So that's Google Scholar, but you have to type it in scholar.google.com. And those are all research websites.
Great. What mushrooms do you suggest for Antisaccharides cerevisiae antibodies and the subsequent Crohn's disease?
Oh. Well, yeah, Saccharomyces isn't, it is a fungal organism, right? They also talk about it as a probiotic. But if you've got antibodies, that's really interesting. So I would probably start with reishi just to kind of downregulate the entire immune response and kind of go from there. So, I would probably start with the liquid if you can tolerate that. If you can't, stick with the capsules. Um, and start with a gram and which is 2 capsules. Do 1 at breakfast, 1 at lunch, and then bump yourself up to 2 grams and then potentially 3 grams. Because what we want to do is we want to down regulate that immune response. We want to help clear out the system. It's going to help with that reactivity in the intestinal tract that is very that's associated with Crohn's disease. So that's kind of where I would have you start with. Just start with reishi, start with 1 gram, then build up to 2, and then see how you do. And if a 3rd gram is helpful, try that too.
Fantastic. I have Lyme disease and I'm constantly trying to improve my immune system. White blood count is constantly low. Would the mushrooms help increase my blood count?
We have seen that in a number of different anecdotal situations, but everyone's going to be different. And what my suggestion to you would be is the Stamets 7 formula. We have seen some really powerful immune upregulatory activity with that formula. And that includes the production of and the increased numbers of a couple of different immune cell types. So that's where I would have you start with. Definitely start with a gram, for a week, and then move up to 2 grams. So this is one of those issues where hopefully, like, you've got a compromised immune response. So you might need just a little bit more. And that's why I think like 2 grams of Stamets 7 might be helpful. If that's not helping, switch over to my community. The reason I think you should do the Stamets 7 first is because there are a lot of other issues that come with that kind of an infection, right? And some people have like joint discomfort or they have cognitive, impairment. And the Stamets 7 is just going to help with so many other systems of your body too. So I think like start with that Stamets 7, do that for a couple of months, see how your tests come back. If you have a bump up, excellent. If you don't, move over to my community and do 2 grams a day. So 2 caps in the morning and 2 caps at lunch, and see how that works.
Would reishi help with high blood pressure? And if so, how much and for how
Yeah,
long?
so there is some research on reishi reducing that the tone of the arteries. Not a whole lot. Usually it's between 5 to 8 points. It really depends on the person. So it's not gonna like, if you've got like significant high blood pressure, this would be an adjuvant. It would be a support. It's really not going to take care of the issue 100%. But you might try 1 to 3 grams, see where you fall in with that whole process. And I would definitely half in the morning, half in the mid to late afternoon, about 4 o'clock, so that you're kind of getting in like a good 8 hours between your serving sizes.
I'm getting a lot of questions about the recording of the webinar. You guys will get an email with the recording of the webinar shortly, I would say the next day or so. Are any of these mushrooms safe if you're pregnant?
So there have not been a lot of safety data studies with pregnant women. However, our edible mushrooms are assumed to be safe during pregnancy. So there's things like lion's mane and maitake and shiitake. So I think lion's mane can be really helpful for moms and babies, like keeps you healthy, keeps your immune system nice and balanced. It also helps like with that neurological regenerative activity. So I think lion's mane would be really wonderful for moms. Maitake might be helpful, especially with blood glucose regulation with moms, but you want to keep your eye open on that too. Sometimes it can kind of like drop your blood pressure. I mean blood glucose levels a little bit too much. So always take the maitake with food.
So a couple of we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to ask this one. It's a very interesting one. I have lupus and my naturopath has suggested I stay away from certain mushrooms. Would you say it's okay for someone like me to use mushroom capsule powders and multiple mushrooms in them?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to come back to reishi. I would definitely look at the capsules, start low, go slow. Start with one capsule in the morning for a week and see how your body responds. If it's good, add another one at lunch for another week. If it's still good, think about moving yourself slowly up to 2 grams a day. If the reishi doesn't work, try that Agaricon, 1 capsule in the morning for a week and see how you respond, and then add a second one at lunch if that goes well for you. So start with reishi, and if that doesn't mix with your body well, move over to that Agaricon. Start low, go slow.
All right, I'm going to do one more. Again, it's about dosaging. It seems to be a repetitive question. Very interesting webinar. I would love to know more about dosage. How would you determine how much you should take or trying to work on a particular health issue? Is there any toxic levels?
That upward limit of 6 grams, and it's not a toxicity issue. It's more about like, is it going to give you better results for the amount of money you're spending, right? It's more of like a cost benefit analysis and a return on your investment. So 1 to 2 grams is really great for most individuals. 3 to 4 grams is that's a more intense intervention. And then 5 to 6 grams, that's if you really want to get that immune system up and running. Or if you're like using like lion's mane for cognitive functioning, 1 to 2 grams is going to give you a really nice, solid support. 3 to 4 grams that's much more intense support. And then 5 to 6, you're going to have to, see if the amount of that mushroom is really worth the cost, and the outcome is really going to be worth the cost of it. So 1 to 2, 3 to 4 is that middle amount. 5 to 6 is really those upward levels.
Thank you, Jerry. There's one question that was quite interesting. Is it safe for children?
So here's a good thing. Again, I think your edible mushrooms are fine. Like maitake, lion's mane can be super helpful for our kids, right? Especially in our world today. One of the things we have had a lot of anecdotal response about is the use of Myco Shield with kids. Like they love that cinnamon and peppermint, and they just get 1 or 2 squirts in their mouth in the morning, and they seem to do really well with it. So although we don't have any specific safety data associated with it, just think about it as like, if you've got a little kid running around, they don't need an adult amount, right? You just kind of like titrate and reduce the amount that you use with them. So like 1 or 2 squirts in the morning of their favorite flavor, cinnamon or peppermint, should be great. I think another example of when to use the mushrooms can be like the Cordici formula for breathing. Now, I don't use a lot with kids, like you're doing drops like 5 or 6 drops up to like 9 or 10 drops at a time, because remember, they're smaller, right? So, but like for those kids that tend to react to environmental triggers, I love that Cordici, half cordyceps, half reishi. You do 5 to 6 drops, see how it works, and then all the way up to like 9 to 10 drops at a time. And you're going to want to give them a good hour in between those servings to make sure that they're responding well.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for your time today. And Jerry, thank you so much for answering so many questions.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate your time tonight. Some really great, thank you guys for an amazing webinar. Thank you for your response. Everyone's just loving. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much.
You guys are so sweet.
Everyone who joined us this evening. You will get a recording of the webinar via email. If you haven't, please just respond to you can respond to the email confirmation and ask for the webinar recording. Thank you so much, everyone who joined. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Happy holidays too.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.